Reborn, I didn't reunite with my wealthy biological parents. Let them live happily with their fake daughter. I became the cherished child of my adoptive parents instead. Years later, my biological parents came begging. I thought they pamper the fake one, so I'll pamper my adoptive parents. Later, when both my biological and adoptive mothers were kidnapped, I thought, sorry, Auntie, I need to save my mom first. After being killed by the fake daughter and her family, I was reborn. I went back to the time before I reunited with my real parents. Looking at my adoptive parents, who loved me dearly, my eyes teared up. All my happiness in my past life ended when I was 4. As my mom gently touched her belly, she asked, Jessica, should we have a little brother or sister for you to play with? Hearing the same words as before, I cried. Mom hugged me, asking, why are you crying, my dear? Do you not want a sibling? I quickly shook my head. I want a little brother and sister. Dad chimed in, what is it then? Is it because we didn't get you ice cream today? I nodded. I loved ice cream as a kid but often got stomachaches, so they restricted me. They just laughed at my gluttony without suspicion. Too much ice cream is not good for you. Let's just have half a tub, okay? Fine. Now Jessica, you stay home and watch cartoons, and we'll go out and get you some ice cream. I knew they were off to a prenatal checkup. In my last life, I waited for them but they never came back. A car crash took them away. Only after did I find out from relatives that I wasn't their biological child. I was an abandoned baby they found in a trash can, almost freezing to death. No one wanted to adopt me, so I ended up in an orphanage. 12 years later, my biological parents, the Taylors, finally took me home. But the family already had a precious fake daughter, Linda. She was born on a snowy day, the same day I almost died. The Taylor family parents, brother and sister all protected her, fearing my presence would upset her. Thinking back, I stopped my parents. Mom, why don't you guys go tomorrow? I want you to play puzzles with me. I acted up for the first time, refusing to let them leave. They didn't want me to feel neglected because of the new baby, so they stayed. This time around, my parents were alive, and I had no intention of going back to the Taylor family. They say Linda is pure and kind. Well, I hope they all love each other then. At this time, I didn't know the truth about myself. I grew up healthy and happy like any normal kid. Mom was a high school math teacher, Dad a college history teacher. Coming from a family of educators, not studying hard felt like a betrayal to them. In my last life, Linda had great grades, and I had a poor education. Mr. and Mrs. Taylor often compared her to me. I worked hard for their approval, but when I presented my excellent report card, they barely acknowledged it. James constantly ridiculed me. What's the point of trying? You're just a stray girl. You'll never measure up to my sister. He had poor grades himself, but always used Linda to put me down. On the day of the college entrance exam, Linda bribed someone to kidnap me. I got lucky and escaped but missed the first exam. I told Mr. and Mrs. Taylor it was Linda's doing, but they accused me of trying to ruin her mood. The police caught the kidnapper, who claimed they acted alone. How did I know it was Linda? She bragged about it to my face. The Taylor family had 2 sons, Ethan and James. Ethan was the golden boy, admired by all. Despite their love for Linda, Ethan was the undisputed heir. He was kind and polite but somehow hard to read. While he did care for Linda, he never made things difficult for me, unlike James, who would bully me in school. James, connected to me by blood, showed me no respect. I seriously suspected he was mentally unstable, not as an insult but as a fact. He was violent and reckless, like he was possessed. He acted like Linda's rabid dog. Linda would tearfully accuse me of bullying her, and Ethan would rally his friends to torment me, locking me in the restroom, putting dead rats in my desk, throwing my backpack into the sink. Those were common occurrences. I had to endure their bullying and beatings, while Linda would be the one pleading for me afterward. Was Ethan really just sticking up for his beloved sister? Maybe not entirely. I'd tell Mr. and Mrs. Taylor about James' cruelty, and they'd promise to deal with it. But if James said I bullied Linda, I was the one punished. In this life, I had a new brother, Jake, the one who didn't get to live in my past life. Jake and I had the usual brother-sister dynamics. I might fight him but wouldn't go too far. While he'd trick me, he knew when to stop. Because of my past life, I had a maturity and sense of reasoning uncommon for my age. I convinced my parents to invest in stocks and real estate. At first, they didn't believe my ramblings. After missing 2 chances to profit, they started to listen, and it paid off. My room was full of economics books, and my parents thought I was a born business prodigy. That money later became my startup fund. My parents wondered how they raised such a business-savvy child as 2 educators. I had to admit, working for the Taylors taught me a lot of valuable business lessons, despite everything. Linda pursued an arts degree and entered showbiz after graduation, keeping her too busy to meddle. During that time, I worked on improving my skills. Back then, I had already given up on the Taylor family couple. I didn't get upset anymore over their favoritism. If I couldn't get family love, I'd make use of the family's resources. I followed Mr. Taylor and my older brother to improve my business skills, build connections, and gather resources. Even if I couldn't stay with the Taylors, I'd do well elsewhere. But they just wouldn't let me go. During a kidnapping, both Linda and I were taken. They chose to save Linda, leaving me to fall off a cliff to my supposed death. That kidnapping was definitely planned, but I was sure Linda couldn't pull it off alone. At that time, the worst she could do to me was use her family's favoritism to taunt me or say some mean things in front of the media. Nothing else. Plus, I was already wary of her, so she couldn't hurt me anymore. There was something I must have overlooked in high school. I went to City First High while Linda attended a private school. In our junior year, Linda and her brother James were caught in a bullying scandal. They bullied more than just me in the past life. Linda wanted to maintain her image as a beautiful and kind heiress, so she always played the victim. James would get people to retaliate for her. Ava was the top student at the private school, a girl from a humble background, pretty and quiet. She was on a special scholarship, tuition-free. Her goal to attend the private school was clear. Her mom was severely ill, and being first in her grade could bring a $10,000 scholarship plus competition bonuses. If she got the city's top score for college entrance exams, there'd be more rewards. She was already cute and innocent looking, and was genuinely independent, working to earn money for her mom's treatment. Linda hated anyone who stole her spotlight. Ava was shy and scared to cause trouble. She stayed silent when bullied. In the past, I couldn't help myself, but this time, I could help Ava. Weakness draws sympathy, excellence captures attention, and Ava had both. Many netizens supported her, and the education department was watching. In the end, James got expelled. The Taylor family pinned everything on him. Netizens criticized him harshly. Didn't he love that sister of his? He should experience bias and injustice himself. In the past, Linda dated someone early and went to a hotel. Somehow it got out, and the elite circles gossiped. Linda cried a river. The Taylor family forced me to take the blame. I had no choice. They had already spread news that I was the one who went to the hotel. James said smugly, "My sister is always praised, unlike you with your bad reputation. Sacrificing you to protect her is the wise choice." So what now that it's James's turn? Linda was good at school and the family favorite, while James was just a spoiled kid who was good for nothing but spending money. So making him take the blame was smart. The Taylor family settled with Ava with a lot of money. Ava got her mom's medical bills covered and transferred to City First High. Seriously, which school wouldn't want to recruit a star student like her? In the past, she indeed got the city's top score with almost perfect marks, which was insane. But the day after receiving her admission notice, she took her own life at home. Ethan was handling Taylor family business well by college. The Taylor family ran a beauty and fashion business. In the past, Ethan wanted to acquire a skincare company for their beauty formula. The company wouldn't sell, so he bribed factory workers to add harmful substances during production. Many users had allergic reactions or worse and complained. The company faced lawsuits and huge compensations, ultimately selling the formula. This time, I reached out to the company's president, Harry. He might not believe me, but he'd be cautious. I had his contact from the past. I didn't pay much attention when the company had issues, only learning the truth years later, when Harry sought revenge on Ethan. But by then, he was powerless against the Taylor family. I thought Harry would lie in wait, catching the mole red-handed. But he was shrewder than I thought. He didn't stop it. He waited until the skincare products hit the market and stirred public outrage, then brought evidence to sue the Taylor family in court. I was glad I hadn't told him who I was. He's not someone to mess with. The Taylor family's reputation tanked. They not only had to compensate Harry's company, but also the public. Ava was still in touch with former classmates. She told me the Taylors cut the kids' allowances by more than half. Even if the Taylors paid a lot in settlements, it shouldn't have come to cutting allowances. But Linda and James were always such big spenders, wasting money on unnecessary things. Linda was a spoiled princess, always getting her way at home. James lived a lavish lifestyle. For the Taylors, it wasn't much. But James liked flaunting and having lots of friends who saw him as a cash cow. Naturally, Linda threw a fit, so she shamelessly took her brother's share. The Taylors and Ethan didn't mind, favoring her as always. But Linda was still in a bad mood. She couldn't spend freely and got shunned at school. With the family scandal, she faced gossip. The bullying scandal trashed her image. Without enough money, her followers didn't listen much. In a bad mood, she needed a scapegoat. Mr. and Mrs. Taylor were her support, and she definitely dared not do anything to her older brother. So that left my dear brother. In my past life, when I returned to the Taylor family, I was stunned to receive the bank card from my parents and thought they were being overly generous. Later, I found out it was only a tenth of what Linda got. She accused me of stealing her jewelry and selling it. To vent her anger, James pushed me down the stairs. I had a concussion and stayed in the hospital for ages, but never received an apology. Mrs. Taylor even wanted to punish me by cutting off my money. I was penniless, couldn't even afford a bus ticket, let alone buy anything. James mocked me. Serves her right, coming from the slums, she needs to curb her greed. But this time around, poor James. His situation is way better than mine in my past life. But let's see if he has my kind of spirit. If he'd still do it willingly, then I have nothing to say. The deep bond between siblings was nothing I deserved. All blessings to him. After my college entrance exam, I made it to university with Ava just as I wanted. She was the city top scorer. Like in my past life, I majored in finance, drawing from my past business memories. I found these courses easy. Linda also got into a top domestic university in my past life, while James, who had terrible grades, was sent abroad by the Taylor family. Now, due to various setbacks, Linda didn't do well on the exam and chose to study abroad. She had a solid foundation. She could have gotten into a bachelor's program domestically, but someone like her can't stand being ordinary. Meanwhile, James didn't go abroad. He went to a vocational college. The Taylor family isn't as rich as they used to be, but they could still afford to send 2 kids abroad. Whatever conflicts they have internally, I haven't figured out yet. During my first year, I started Sun Company, exploring the internet sector. I didn't forget my plan to dig a pit for the Taylor family, since I knew their business inside out. I avoided meeting anyone from the Taylor family. Until my senior year, at a gathering, I ran into Mr. Taylor and Ethan. At 22, I finally met the Taylor family again. When I got home from work, I found the Taylors and Ethan in my house. As soon as she saw me, Mrs. Taylor started to cry and tried to hug me, but I stepped aside. Dad, Mom, who are they? My parents looked troubled, but hadn't responded before Mrs. Taylor jumped in. Child, we are your birth parents. We finally found you. I always pretended to be unaware of my background, so I had to play along. Huh. I looked confused. My parents explained how they adopted me over 20 years ago. I frowned, not wanting to accept it. My parents were worried. The Taylors had teary eyes. Ethan had a blank expression but kept staring at me, while Jake seemed unaffected. Ha, Jessica, so you really aren't our biological child. I held my mom's hand. Mom and Dad, we've lived together for so long, and I'm grown up now. Why bring up the past? Aren't we doing well as a family? I said, annoyed, clearly upset with anyone disturbing my family's peace. Mr. and Mrs. Taylor looked awkward. My dad comforted me. Jessica, don't worry. You will always be our child. No matter what, we'll support you. My mom added, honey, even though I didn't give birth to you, I've raised you just like Jake. I looked at the Taylor family sitting opposite. How can I be sure they're really my family? Who knows if they're con artists? I spoke rudely, but anyone would understand after just receiving this shock that I in my past life. When the Taylors came to the orphanage for me, they weren't crying their eyes out like now. Linda was bawling like she lost her parents, and Mrs. Taylor was comforting her. James was full of disdain. This hillbilly is really my sister? Can't be, might be a scam. Seeing Mr. and Mrs. Taylor not saying anything, Ethan finally spoke up. Hello, little sister, I'm your brother Ethan. You see, there was a mix-up at the hospital when you were born, and you were swapped with another baby Linda. We only found out she wasn't our biological child when we saw you at a business event. You look a lot like Mom, and you share the same birthday as Linda. So we investigated that that's a lie. They already knew Linda wasn't their biological child when she was 16. That's how they found me in the orphanage. They probably gave up finding me because I didn't end up in the orphanage this time. I composed myself and asked. My parents only had Jake, so there was no swap. Where did Linda come from? Mrs. Taylor explained. Linda is the housekeeper's child. So it wasn't a swap. It was a deliberate exchange to take my life. I eyed Ethan. You were covering for Linda with that story. Mrs. Taylor quickly defended Linda. Jessica, we've wronged you over the years, but Linda is also innocent. Ethan was more rational and changed the subject. Don't worry, we've sent the housekeeper to jail. I won't let anyone who hurt you go free. So decisive? In my past life, it took me a lot of effort to send that woman to jail because the Taylor family didn't want her criminal record to affect Linda's future. They also didn't want her tied to Linda, so they tried to pay her off. I later called the police, which only deepened the Taylor family's prejudice against me. Don't call me little sister. There's no proof we're related, I said without much patience. It was his special nickname for Linda. Ethan slightly smiled. I was too impatient. If you don't believe it, we can do a DNA test. He always had this calm demeanor, like a gentle big brother. Is Linda that actress? I suddenly asked. Yes, she's filming out of town, so she couldn't come to meet you. But don't worry, Linda is married now. You'll be the only daughter at home. My parents and I will make it up to you, Mrs. Taylor said tearfully, holding my hand. Dear child, come home with Mrs. Taylor. I was at a loss for words. No, I'm happy with the Roberts family. Are you still mad at us, not wanting to acknowledge Mrs. Taylor? She persisted. Mr. Taylor finally intervened. All right, it's normal for Jessica to have a hard time accepting this. We need to take things slow. Then he looked at me. Jessica, no matter what, I'm your biological father. If you don't believe it, we can do a DNA test. So, at my parents' insistence, I went with the Taylor family to get a DNA test. They wanted me to find my biological parents. The results were clear. Both families had a meal together, but I remained aloof. The Taylors suggested I move in with them, but I refused. Back home, I gathered news about the Taylor family's troubles over the years and showed my parents. Ever since Harry's lawsuit, the Taylor family had been declining, facing repeated setbacks. They've mortgaged almost everything, except for the family villa and the old house. They desperately needed a large sum of money. I know this because I had a hand in causing it. The other credit goes to their seemingly kind-hearted Linda. Destroying her maternal family's company with her husband is something she could definitely do. In a past life, when I went back to the Taylor family, Linda was openly hostile, afraid I'd take everything from her. The Taylor's indulgence reassured her. Now that I didn't return, she'd only be more scared. The unknown is the scariest. For 6 years, she'd remind herself, what if I returned one day? All her gains would be lost. So she planned a marriage alliance with the Smith family, preferring to give the Taylor assets to them, even betraying the Taylors to latch onto the Smiths. Judging by Ethan's stance, I think they've been deceived by Linda. They must have checked my identity before coming. They sent the nanny to jail themselves, not caring about Linda's future, just to appease me, right? My parents had no idea about the past life, but I wanted to warn them not to trust the Taylors too much. Mom, Dad, the Taylors started searching for their lost daughter 6 years ago. How come they're claiming they only found out recently? 6 years ago, they knew about the child swap, but only jailed that nanny recently. They raised the nanny's daughter with so much care. Never mind avenging me. It shows they never really cared about me. Mom was skeptical. Really? What would they be after? Dad flipped through the documents, looking serious. If this document is legit, the Taylors are truly an unscrupulous business. As Jessica's also in business, getting involved with them offers no benefits. Jake, my forward-thinking brother, chimed in. Sis, are they planning to sell you to some geezer for money? Mom shot him a glare. What are you spouting? But that's how it goes in novels. A marriage alliance for business gains. I chuckled. Not impossible. But no worries, I know what I'm doing. Just a heads up. Mr. Taylor and Ethan, busy with company matters, only visited occasionally. Ethan brought some jewelry girls typically love, but I recognized them as Linda's. They're already strained financially to afford expensive jewelry, and buying cheaper ones seemed insincere. In a past life, when I first returned to the Taylors, Ethan gave me a $20,000 bracelet. I was moved and thought he was very generous until I inadvertently overheard Linda's snarky comment. Brother, Jessica came back, and you just give her such a cheap bracelet. Won't she be mad? I mean, one of my dresses costs $300K. Upon hearing cheap, I felt sad but not angry. It was, after all, from my brother. Then Ethan said, how is it cheap? Given her previous life, $20K is astronomical. If it weren't for us bringing her back, she'd still be starving. She should be grateful. To him, I wasn't worth more. Mr. Taylor brought a stock transfer deed, offering me a 10% stake. I refused everything they offered. Maybe years ago, I'd have needed it, but now I can afford it myself. Mr. Taylor looked ashamed. We were wrong for not finding you sooner. We just want to make it up to you. Finding me earlier wouldn't necessarily make me go with them. I've been very happy all these years. Since money wouldn't sway me, they tried the emotional route. Mrs. Taylor visited the Roberts family daily, sharing stories of my childhood with my mom. She's my birth mother, so seeing her care, my mom treated her with respect. Whenever she saw me, Mrs. Taylor would express her deep remorse for abandoning me. In a past life, I suffered in an orphanage, and she didn't show much guilt. A month later, I had warmed to her. She seized the moment to suggest staying over to bond with me. I arranged a guest room for her. Jessica, isn't this mattress too hard? And the room doesn't face the sun? The decor isn't great either, and the lighting. I chuckled. No way, we're staying just fine. That morning, I was getting ready to leave for work. Mom, Dad, I've scheduled you for a checkup, don't forget. Jake will pick you up soon. Got it, I remember. Mrs. Taylor saw this and cautiously asked, Jessica, I've been feeling not so great lately, can I go too? I hadn't noticed before she mentioned it. Back in the day, Mrs. Taylor was vibrant, regularly got beauty treatments, wore jewelry, and never wore out-of-season clothes. Now she looked worn out, dressed plainly in old clothes, and wasn't wearing any jewelry. Auntie, the checkup was booked in advance. Maybe next time. She nodded helplessly. All right. Saying next time is like empty promises. Back when I returned to the Taylor family, everyone said they wanted to make it up to me. All talk, no action. They'd say, we'll take you traveling with Linda next time. They didn't like me looking cheap and said, in a few days, we'll take you shopping. Whatever Shwe has, you'll have too. People gossiped about my background in their circles. We'll throw a party in a few days to introduce you. Mrs. Taylor took me to important events, finally bought me a set of jewelry. Then just because Linda liked it, she gave it to her. I'll get you another set, she'd say. None of it ever happened. I lost count of how many empty promises I ate in that previous life. Right after I said that, Ava arrived. She greeted my parents, and upon seeing Ava, Mrs. Taylor's expression soured. Jessica, who is she? I pretended not to notice and introduced. She's Ava, my best friend, and a renowned neuroscientist. She's heading to the hospital, and just happened to be able to give my parents a ride. Ava acted like she didn't recognize her and greeted politely. Mrs. Taylor awkwardly responded, and then nervously returned to her room. After work that day, I specifically went to a luxury store, bought the latest season's clothes and bags, and raided a jewelry store. My mom never cared for such luxury items. Anything I got her ended up collecting dust. But these were exactly Mrs. Taylor's taste. Just seeing the shopping bags made Mrs. Taylor's eyes widen. Jessica, why do you buy so much stuff? She beamed as she approached me. My mom glanced over from the couch, somewhat helpless. Why buy all this again? Didn't I tell you to save money for yourself? I greeted Mrs. Taylor, bypassing her to sit next to my mom. I fibbed, "Oh Mom, it was all gifts from business partners, a little token for my beloved mother." "Don't try to fool me, you spent a lot, didn't you?" Despite what she said, my mom looked through every item. "I don't really have anywhere to carry these bags to though." I chuckled, "Then take them grocery shopping. You'd better keep these jewels for yourself, they're too fancy for me." Mrs. Taylor jumped in. "Oh, is this the new necklace? It's not fancy, it would be perfect with a dress." She introduced the brands to my mom, who listened politely. Then Mrs. Taylor hinted, "I've always loved buying jewelry from them." My mom started to say something, but I interrupted. "Auntie, I wasn't sure what you liked, so I just got things for my mom. Let's do a shopping trip together in a few days." "All right, Jessica is so thoughtful." She forced a smile, eyes on the shopping bags. My mom nudged me, giving me a look like I should send Mrs. Taylor something. I pretended not to notice, and pulled out a few more boxes. Those earlier were just for show. These were truly for my mom. She doesn't like diamonds but loves jade and emeralds. She was delighted when she opened the box. "Wow, this jade bracelet and emerald earrings are subtle and elegant." I asked friends to source some good jade. "Let's check them out this weekend." "I don't know much about this, easy to get fooled." She joked, "Sure, I'll use my keen eyes. Nobody will fool me." My mom and I chatted while unwrapping things, and Mrs. Taylor sat off to the side watching. Later that night, Mrs. Taylor spoke to me alone. "Jessica, about that checkup you mentioned, when can you take me?" I frowned slightly. "Auntie, you seem fine to me, but I just feel unwell. I've never lived like this before." My expression hardened. "What do you mean, Auntie? If you find the conditions here unsatisfactory, maybe you should leave." She quickly explained, "I don't mean that, just tired these days. Maybe you could take your mom for a massage if possible. I'd love a beauty treatment too. I'm really busy. Let's discuss it later." Mrs. Taylor looked hurt. "You have time to pick jewelry for your foster mom, but can't spare a little concern for your birth mother?" "Enough," I snapped. "My mom and you cannot be compared. She saved my life and raised me for years. Even after having my brother, she treats me as her own. Meanwhile, you've never raised me even a day. Why should you be compared to my real parents?" Mrs. Taylor had never faced such indignation. Mr. Taylor never bothered with trivial matters, and the children always catered to her. She was angry, her tone disdainful. "They're just two teachers. Sure, they raised you, but pay them, and that settles it. We're your true family. I gave birth to you." I shook her hand off coldly. "Well, let me make it clear now. The Roberts family is my real family, and I only acknowledge them as my parents. If you can't respect my family, there's no need for the Taylor family to contact me again." Mrs. Taylor seemed heartbroken, leaving in tears. James arrived. It's the first time in this life that I've seen him, and I almost didn't recognize him, that he doesn't have the arrogance of a wealthy young man anymore. Gone is his cockiness when bullying others. Now when he faces me, he's no longer looking down on me, acting like he's all that. He's quiet, awkward, and hesitant. James graduated from college last year. Just like before, he doesn't have any notable skills. The Taylor family isn't rich enough to let him continue living lavishly. Now he's working as Linda's assistant. That's right, the young master of the Taylor family is a sidekick to an adopted daughter. Mrs. Taylor explained that Linda wanted him to gain some experience as an assistant, and when the time is right, she'd help him enter the entertainment industry. The Smith family owns a famous entertainment company, and Linda is now the young mistress of that family. It should be easy for James to get into the industry, right? Why is he working as an assistant? Unless Linda never planned on giving him any resources. But being a sidekick is probably what he's always loved to do. Staying true to his nature, I decided to greet James first. "You're James, aren't you?" He looked up at me and softly said, "Sister." He never called me that in his past life. I smiled and responded, then handed him a new phone I just bought. "I heard you like playing games. This phone is perfect for that." Mrs. Taylor was overjoyed, seeing this as a breakthrough in our previously strained relationship. "James, get along well with your sister Jessica." James accepted the phone awkwardly, thanking me. Just then Jake got home from school and instantly blew up. "Jessica, Wasn't that phone meant for me? James was at a loss. I nodded. It was for you, but James is here now. Jake shouted, you could have taken him to get another one. You promised to get me a new phone if I did well in exams. I've been taking extra classes for 3 months. 3 months. My mom cut him off. Jake, don't be rude. James is your brother too. James said hesitantly, I'm sorry, I don't need it. I put it back in his hands. It's fine, you take it. You're also my brother. I playfully knocked Jake's head. I just met him. Why not a little gift? Can't you let him have this? James's eyes lit up a bit. He didn't expect me to take his side. Humph. Jake stormed upstairs. James looked worried. Did I make him mad? I chuckled. It's not your fault. Do you like the phone? James, who hadn't felt favored in a while, happily opened the phone. Thank you, sister. A while later, Jake came back down, anger gone, smiling again. He had a similar phone in hand. Jess, I knew you'd be fair. I rolled my eyes. I was just teasing you. I knew James was coming. So I bought an extra phone for you and put it in your room. James, caught between emotions, realized my previous kindness was just a joke between Jake and me. While we ate dinner, the topic of Jake's grades came up. Mrs. Taylor asked, Jake's taking college entrance exams soon, right? How are his grades? My mom replied, they're okay. He should get into a good school. Not as good as Jessica, though. She graduated from Tsinghua University. Proud parents always boast about their kids. Mrs. Taylor chimed in, really? Jessica is so excellent. My oldest son also graduated from Tsinghua. Truly sibling talents. Linda's grades were good too, but she wanted to study performing arts abroad, and now she's a big star. James, who wasn't mentioned at all, sat with his head down, eating without tasting. I quietly noticed and gave him his favorite dishes. He was surprised I knew his preferences. James would be staying for a few days to bond with us. After dinner, I played a couple of games with Jake. Gaming often leads to arguments, and when we lost, I started wrestling with him. I had the upper hand. What was that move? I accused. It's your fault, not mine. Mrs. Taylor suggested my mom intervene, but my mom casually said no need. Whoever loses the fight gets punished. James watched us, clearly envious. In the Taylor family, no one dared to speak harshly to Linda. If you made her cry, you'd be punished by the whole family. It's a flawed system. They could love each child equally, but chose favoritism instead. Everyone doted on Linda. The real problem is unfairness. Favoritism naturally leads to resentment. Ethan, being the heir, didn't mind spoiling his sister a little more. But what about James? In his past life, I sensed his jealousy. Linda was favored, and he didn't dare complain. Also, I was the lowest in the family hierarchy, serving as his scapegoat. That was one reason he bullied me. He was envious and afraid. I was better at everything, and he feared I'd surpass him at home. So he used Linda as an excuse to suppress and bully me to boost his own sense of superiority. After gaming with Jake, I called Ethan to the second-floor playroom. This was basically Jake's territory, filled with electronic equipment. Jake also collected many discontinued gaming consoles. Though no one played them anymore, he loved studying them, and I helped him gather a few. When James entered, he looked both amazed and envious. I knew that feeling all too well. In my past life, after staying in the Taylor family's guest room for a few days, I had the same feeling when I saw Linda's lavishly decorated room. James's love for gaming hasn't changed in either life. Jake loved playing video games since he was a kid. My dad knew about it, and instead of stopping him, he guided Jake towards making games. During summer and winter breaks, I found courses for him to learn a bit about computers and software development. Jake was interested, and even wrote a small game program, and met some like-minded friends. James played a few games with Jake, and seemed a bit reluctant to stop when they were done. Lately, whenever I had free time, I took James out shopping and got him things he liked. Mrs. Taylor was supportive. I noticed his clothes were getting old, so I took him to get some new ones. He mentioned he admired Jake's collection of gaming consoles, so I got him the same kind. He liked Jake's watch, so I gave him one the next day. Basically, I wanted him to feel the pampering Linda receives. At first, he didn't even dare to ask for a phone, but now he had someone willing to fulfill all his wishes unconditionally. James was both touched and anxious. gradually opening up to me. He hinted that Linda wasn't good to him. I was shocked. How's that possible? Linda's such a sweet and kind girl. How could he say that? I almost laughed but held it back. He sulked. How do you know she's sweet and kind? I pretended to be innocent, saying it was what I've been told, and I liked her from watching her shows. He said that was all fake, and that she puts on an act. Even her public image was fake. No way. James looked down, not explaining further. He'd probably told his family many times, and had given up hope. I added, maybe Linda just has a bit of a temper. Regardless, she's been your sister for so many years, you shouldn't think the worst of her. He smiled bitterly. I wish it had been you living with me all these years that I couldn't help but smile mockingly. James' situation was similar to mine in my previous life, but he had it better. When we got home, Mrs. Taylor suddenly suggested that James should leave. She said, James, you've rested enough. Why don't you go accompany your sister? It's difficult for her without you. James, frowning, refused, saying, why does she need me? She's a grown woman. Mrs. Taylor countered that Linda was vulnerable in the entertainment industry, and that as her brother, he should protect her. He replied that she wasn't his sister, and that his real sister was here. He accused Linda of being a freeloader who had enjoyed the family's resources for too long. Seeing them argue, I stopped my mom from intervening, saying families should talk things out. I pretended to mediate, but it didn't help. James said, you've been biased for so many years. Mrs. Taylor shot back, what rivalry do you have with Linda? She's been sensible and outstanding since she was young. Can you compare to that? You're still living off the family. And if you want to enter the industry, won't your sister have to help you? James said he didn't need her help. Years of suppression and dissatisfaction erupted, and James' voice became hysterical, recounting his childhood sacrifices and familial neglect. It turned out James hadn't been able to study abroad due to these issues. Mrs. Taylor slapped him, saying Linda was his sister, and that he was wicked. My mom tried to awkwardly mediate, but ultimately decided not to interfere further in familial matters. I just watched the scene unfold, refraining from clapping out of respect. James pushed past her and stormed out. My mom went to console Mrs. Taylor, who lamented about her 3 children. The eldest was mature, the daughter was sweet, but the youngest was a disappointment, joking he must have been swapped at birth. Maybe it was a matter of education. Mrs. Taylor, overwhelmed, went to rest as my mom sat down, shaking her head, thinking their family was a mess. She reflected that though Jake and I bickered, it wasn't as bad as James' resentment. I hugged her, expressing gratitude for the upbringing. My mom looked at me with relief, saying conflict often stemmed from parental favoritism. She told me if my biological parents ever neglected me for others, I should speak up. Her words brought a lump to my throat, and memories from my past life flooded back. If only I had parents then, no one would have bullied me like the Taylors did before. But thankfully, this time they were still alive. Thanks to my parents, I felt like the happiest child in the world. Seeing James had run out upset, as his sister, I had to check on him. I found him, having just kicked over a trash can. I told him to pick it up. He was surprised to see me, asking why. I repeated myself, and he did it sheepishly, claiming he wasn't trying to cause trouble, just frustrated. I softened my tone, advising him to treat Mrs. Taylor better regardless of his feelings. As she was still his mom, he had tears in his eyes and sounded really upset. She's not really my mom. Her heart is with Linda, he said. That sister of yours. Does she really treat you that bad? Of course. He nodded vigorously. Supposed to be an assistant, but she just uses me as a punching bag. On set, if she's in a bad mood, she takes it out on me. If I fight back, she acts like I'm the one bullying her. I gave him a sympathetic look. You've suffered enough, come with me. Joy burst from his eyes. You believe me? I smiled slightly. Of course, you're my brother. I went to Mrs. Taylor and said we'd keep James a bit longer. She was a bit reluctant, worried something might happen to Linda if James delayed. Honestly, I admired her unwavering love for Linda. It was pure and without motive. I had to call Mr. Taylor to convince him to let James stay. When James found out, he was so happy, trusting me even more. But over the next few days, I started distancing myself. I had ordered a computer for him. He picked the style and color himself. When it finally arrived, he loved it. James, I hesitated, looking unsure. What's up, sis? He was still smiling. Well, Jake improved a lot in his recent exams. I was thinking of giving him this computer as a reward. His smile faded. He's a senior now. It might motivate him for college applications. You're older, let's give it to him for now. I'll get you another one later. He looked a bit better, though still a bit unhappy, but nodded. Okay. By the way, you said you wanted to get into the entertainment industry, right? I know a director through a friend. I'll ask for you. Really? James asked, lighting up. Thanks, sis. No problem, I said, patting his shoulder. I did know a director, but I couldn't ask him to take on a newbie with no skills. I told James I'd take him to meet the director that weekend. On that day, I left early and didn't come home until well after the arranged time. James called me. Sis, where are you? I was wandering on C University's campus. Sorry, James, I totally forgot. Since Jake doesn't have class today, I figured I'd show him around, you know, his dream school and all. Get him motivated for his studies. James sounded pretty disappointed. But you promised, Jake's a senior, it's more urgent for him. Next time, alright? You always say next time. You said Jake and I are both your brothers, enough. He's younger than you, why fight with him? I said, annoyed, and hung up. A little later, Jake came over, munching on a pastry. Sis, can we try another school next time? The cafeteria's food is terrible here. James grew anxious. He tried talking to me several times, but I brushed him off, saying I was busy with work. Finally, I went to him one day. James, I'm free today. Wanna come shopping with me? After being ignored for days, he eagerly nodded. Sure. I drove him to a restaurant. Let's eat first. A friend of mine is there too. Is it your boyfriend? He joked, trying to lighten the mood. No, I replied cryptically. Girlfriend. Ava was waiting in the private room. James, this is my friend Ava. James didn't recognize her but greeted warmly. Hi, I'm James. Ava didn't move or reply, just stared at him coldly. This is your newfound brother? She asked. James chuckled. Did my sister mention me? Suddenly, Ava stood and slapped James hard. A handprint instantly appeared on his face. He was stunned and looked at me for help. Sis, then another slap. After Ava hit him a third time, I had to intervene. Jake, what's wrong? Ava asked. James, don't you remember me? I don't, he stammered. He'd bullied too many to recall them all. Huh? But bullies have no right to forget. You may not remember, but I do. You tore up my papers, dumped food on my head, spilled ink on my chair, and had people drag me to an alley to beat me. Each accusation drained more color from James's face. He didn't remember Ava, but he knew he'd bullied many. Frightened, he grabbed my arm. Sis, it wasn't me. I shrugged him off and walked over to Ava, glaring at him with disgust. Ava's my friend, she wouldn't lie to me. He tried to hold on to Ava. I'm sorry, Ava. I was stupid. I'll make it up to you. Just don't make my sister mad. Get lost. Another slap. I felt the show had gone far enough. James, go home. I need to talk to Ava. Sis, out. He left, defeated. I shut the door and turned to see Ava relaxing in her seat. That felt good. She exclaimed. It's not over, I chuckled. I won't let him off easy. The real drama's still tonight. Back home, with my parents out, I had free reign. Watching James anxiously, I said to Mrs. Taylor, Aunt, you should send him away. He's not welcome here anymore. Mrs. Taylor was puzzled. Jessica, what happened? Did he upset you? James was close to tears. Stop calling me sis. You almost drove my best friend to suicide. And probably not just Ava. Just how many people have you bullied? As soon as I spoke, Mrs. Taylor understood everything. She grabbed James and hit him. You little brat, look what you've done. How did I end up with a son like you? Bullying Jessica's friend too? After she was done, she looked over at me carefully. Go on, I chuckled lightly, worried she might hurt her hand, and handed her a rolling pin. Use this. Mrs. Taylor froze for a moment, then reluctantly whacked James again. I stood watching, wishing Ava could witness this. When Mrs. Taylor finally spoke, her voice was gentle. Jessica, your brother was wrong, but those things happened a long time ago. He was expelled, and we compensated the girl. James has been punished. He's still your brother though. Shouldn't you back your family? I replied coldly, I don't care about blood ties. Compared to friends I've known for years, what's a brother I've just met? Plus, what he did was wrong. Bullying so many people, expulsion isn't enough. Money can't heal the hurt he caused. James, Ava was top of her class, so talented. And you almost ruined her life. James kneeled and cried, sis, I know I was wrong. It was Linda's fault, she tricked me. Enough. I slapped him. You're still lying. Ava told me it was your idea. Your mom was right, you're a jerk. Now you're trying to blame your sister? I shifted the conversation to Linda. I can't believe Linda is as terrible as you say she is. You claim she abused you, but I bet you mistreated her. Do you just like picking fights, James? After I was so nice to you, would you hit me next? James grabbed my leg, shaking his head. No, it's all Linda's fault. Why do you believe her over me? She's wicked and cruel. He started muttering to himself, saying it was all Linda's fault. If it weren't for her, I'd still be in school, studying abroad, breaking into showbiz, being praised. It's all because of her. I couldn't help but laugh. Still avoiding responsibility, James? It's sickening. Mrs. Taylor couldn't bear staying any longer. Auntie, I don't want to see James anymore. I'm kicking him out. My parents are too soft-hearted to tell you. But you should return to the Taylor family to spare everyone the awkwardness. Jessica, Mrs. Taylor tried to plead, but I didn't let her. I had someone help her pack. When my parents came back, I told them about James. Embarrassed, Mrs. Taylor took her son and left. My parents were furious, not just out of concern for Ava. They're both teachers and can't stand bullying. My dad waved it off, saying, Jessica should stay away from the Taylors. They have a poor family upbringing. Parents have a big role. They should properly educate their kids, instead of covering up and enabling them, just because they have money and influence. Other people's kids are treasures too. My mom shook her head. James seemed so timid. I can't believe he did this. I smirked. He wasn't timid before. You can thank Linda for that. Evil meets evil. After Mrs. Taylor and James left, it was my bio dad's turn. Mr. Taylor was all about appearances and family interests. In a past life, he favored Linda for fitting the image of a Taylor heiress, and because of her engagement with the Smith family. I was a kid from an orphanage, a source of embarrassment for him. At my first party, I was nervous, got mocked, and afterward he slapped me. What a disgrace. I don't have a daughter this embarrassing. He was biased toward Mrs. Taylor and overlooked James' bullying. Later, when I showed my skills working for the Taylors, he started to care. He introduced me to business partners with pride, saying, this is my daughter. By then, I couldn't be swayed by fake fatherly love. I wanted Taylor family shares, but he told me to recognize my place, just a worker to him. When I wanted to leave, he didn't want to lose the benefits I brought him. He suggested I marry for the family's gain. Later, when a project went south due to leaked design plans, Mr. Taylor blamed me even though he knew I wasn't the culprit. Jessica, I care about results and profits, he said. I suspected the same person set me up and kidnapped me and Linda, because that person targeted only me. Kidnapping Linda was just a cover. After all, what kind of kidnapper does a forced choice between two hostages? That's just dumb. More ransom is better, right? Having the chance to get hold of the Taylor family's blueprints while kidnapping both Linda and me is no small feat. The key here is that this person's interests clash with mine. Aside from Ethan and James, I can't think of anyone else. As for James, I doubt his capability. Not long after Mrs. Taylor left, Mr. Taylor reached out to me. He seemed serious at the restaurant. The Taylor family can sever ties with James. What? I was surprised. He said in full seriousness, I won't support him financially anymore. Whatever you want to do with him, I won't stop you. Huh. I thought he was here to plead. But that makes sense, given Mr. Taylor's nature. He is your biological son, I pointed out sarcastically. He laughed it off. Jessica, you're smart, a little trick. And you drove a wedge between James and Linda. They still have feelings. I retorted. My phone buzzed with entertainment news. The trending star Linda bullying newcomers. Linda beating her assistant. Linda ruining some actress's appearance. Each accompanied by photos and several clear videos. No chance for her to clear her name. No guessing needed that it was James's doing. And my provocation wasn't in vain. I looked at Mr. Taylor. You always knew about James, right? Knew all the injustices he faced. Knew how Linda bullied and beat him. Just like before, he chose to watch passively. Mr. Taylor said coldly, he's to blame for his own failures. He wasn't here to discuss family bonds with me. From the moment I kicked Mrs. Taylor and them out of the Roberts family, he knew that discussing family ties with me was pointless. So he didn't put on a fatherly act anymore. You're better than all three of them. Son has grown so big in just 3 years. The potential is limitless. If you hadn't been taken away by the nanny, I would have groomed you into an outstanding heir. I don't buy it. I replied quickly, too bluntly, and Mr. Taylor's expression cracked a little. He brought out a new equity transfer paper. Then now I can promise you. I didn't even give it a look, Mr. Taylor. I'm not dumb. What's left in the Taylor family for me? Young people should think long-term, he said. The Taylors and Smiths are working on a project together. If it succeeds, the Taylors can revive. His tone was certain. Clearly, Linda facilitated this cooperation. And the catch is, you won't just give it for free, right? I need $50 million in funds. How much? I was shocked, Mr. Taylor. It wasn't easy building from scratch. If I give you all my liquid capital, what happens to my company? He was relaxed. What are you worried about? Once the project succeeds and the money flows back, we'll give it to you immediately. The whole Taylor family will be yours. Another pipe dream? I shook my head. I don't accept. He's confused, dissatisfied with a sure-win venture like this? I smirked. It's not dissatisfaction. I just don't trust you. What if you screw me over? You, Mr. Taylor was furious. Just joking. I quickly interrupted him. Not partnering with you because I'm a good socialist youth. I firmly oppose all lawbreakers. The next moment, my phone rang, cutting off his gathered anger. I pointed at my phone and said, I know you're mad, but don't be. After he finished his call, he looked at me puzzled. Jessica, was it you? I chuckled. No, it was you. Soon, news of the Taylor family's tax evasion will be all over the place. Everyone will know that the successful Mr. Taylor is nothing but a hypocrite. Jessica. He slapped the table angrily. I am your father. My father taught me to obey the law and be strict with myself. I glanced at him coldly and said, I don't have a father as disgraceful as you. I reported the Taylor family anonymously, and I actually handed over the evidence to the tax authorities. I'm not interested in taking anything from them, but I didn't plan to leave anything for them either. Mr. Taylor is a selfish and cold man, doesn't care about family, can even abandon his son. So I'll ruin his proud career and his precious reputation. Mr. Taylor will go to jail. Linda's scandals are still online, and James can't handle it. Crucially, Ethan, the current head of the Taylor family, is nowhere to be found. The Smith family pulled their investment, ending cooperation with the Taylors. With that massive tax bill, they have to turn to Linda for a loan. Linda wasn't pleased, and Mrs. Taylor and James caused a scene at the Smith family's building, only to be thrown out by security. Mrs. Taylor's tried visiting me several times, but my people stopped her at the gate. When my folks found out, they sighed and did nothing. My dad gave me a stern grilling and reminded me, a gentleman loves money, but he takes it with integrity. I helplessly replied, Dad, I paid my taxes. With everything in chaos, I thought Ethan would come to me. After all, with Mr. Taylor gone, he's in charge. But Linda showed up first. Linda, who took my identity since birth, the source of my suffering in my past life. We finally met now. I've taken revenge on Mr. Taylor, Mrs. Taylor, James, and the Taylor company, but hadn't targeted her yet. Even her current scandals are James's doing. Albeit with my starting push. Do I hate her? Of course I do. But I hate my own family even more. Those people connected to me by blood. In my past life. Even though Linda took my place for those 16 years, what could I do but resent it? Once I was back with the Taylor family, Linda initially tested the waters, trying to figure out their attitude. It was their constant enabling that gave her the confidence to hurt me. She'd cry, and my own loved ones would blame, scold, and even hit me. She'd make up any lie, and they'd believe her. It wasn't like finding out the truth was hard for them, yet they insisted it was my fault. If they had cared for me even a little more, maybe I wouldn't have gone through all that suffering. Linda might have handed over the knife, But my so-called family helped her slice the flesh. Sure, I hate Linda, but I hate them 1,000 times more. You must be Jessica? Linda was dressed to the nines, with arrogance and disdain filled her eyes. That's me, I replied. She gave a cold laugh. And that's all you are? My brother said you're impressive, but I checked out your company. It's nowhere near the Smith family's decades-old empire. I chuckled. You just want to say I'm not as good as you, right? That I'll never catch up? She nodded. It's a fact. I scoffed. And what's your confidence based on? The scandals all over you? I have the Smith family backing me, plenty of resources. And even if I quit being a star, I can always be a wealthy homemaker. Jessica, you have no idea how much I hate you. Her eyes were full of malice. Hate me? I don't get it. Sure, you took my spot, but I've never tried to take it back. So, why do you hate me? She sneered. How come you get to be the Taylor family's real daughter, and I'm a fake? Why wasn't I born into the Taylor family? Since I was 16, I've been living in fear, worried you'd come back any day. Even after our parents found out the truth, they claimed they'd treat me like their daughter, but deep down, they've always thought of you. I couldn't be bothered with her anymore. Someone as greedy as her would never be satisfied with anything. Is it my fault? I taunted. I got lucky. Why weren't you born to the nanny? Why couldn't you keep your secret? Why didn't they forget about me? She was so furious, her lips turned pale. So what? You've returned to the Taylor family now, and you're so unlucky. If only you'd come back a few years earlier, you might have been a rich young lady. Now the Taylor family has nothing, but I'm still the Smith family's young lady. Is this why you helped your husband's family screw over your own? I shot back. Stealing Taylor family secrets, intercepting their projects, and poaching their executives. All to smooth the path for your husband William. You truly love him, huh? Linda panicked. I don't know what you're talking about. I stayed calm. If I know, it means I have proof. She was stunned for a while, then composed herself. So what if you know? I wanted to destroy the Taylor family before you could come back. Even if you're the real daughter, you'll get nothing. I shrugged, unfazed. Whatever, it's not my loss. She frowned. What do you mean? You're not planning to go back to the Taylor family? Did she think I'd return just to flaunt my miserable life? I didn't answer her, saved the recording and left. This life, I didn't plan to do anything to Linda. I'd rather watch her get what she deserves. Ever since reuniting with the Taylor family, I'd been secretly keeping tabs on their moves. With so much going on at the Taylors, Ethan still hadn't reached out to me. Something was off. I couldn't track him down. Go stay in the dorms for a while, I told Jake. Why? As a boarding student, you can have more study time after evening self-study. I study just fine at home. Just go. I won't. Dorms aren't comfortable for sleeping. I glared at him. Sleep? You're in your senior year. Do you even know that? How can you sleep so much? Jessica, you're not trying to send me away to inherit the family's 3 acres alone, are you? I said I'll pay you. He grinned, giving me a salute. Sure, boss. Once Jake was sent away, I called in a favor to get my parents a trip to relax overseas. They resisted at first. I said I'm traveling for work. If the Taylors come looking for you, how will you handle it? My parents disliked the Taylors, but the blood connection made any confrontation awkward, so it was best they avoided it altogether. I couldn't exactly tell them about being reborn. It was too fantastical, and they'd never believe it. I arranged security around the school, and for my parents' protection. Remembering my past life's kidnapping, I could almost still feel the sensation of falling over a cliff and the agony of shattered bones. The Roberts family villa was empty. Someone had to live there. I brought Mrs. Taylor and James back. In the living room, James huddled in a corner, too scared to face me. Mrs. Taylor looked worn out, tears staining her face. Jessica, please help Mr. Taylor. We mortgaged our old home, and still can't gather enough money. I ignored her complaints and went straight to the point. Where's Ethan? Your brother's also out trying to get money, Mrs. Taylor said. Where? I asked, impatient. I'm not sure. He said he went abroad to find a friend. Going abroad, huh? When? Just 3 days ago. I got a bit panicky. My parents left at that time too. I shook off the feeling and thought, what's going on? Isn't Linda the apple of their eye? She's so kind. Why wouldn't she help them? Don't mention her. She's not even biologically ours. Never raised to be grateful. We provided her with everything, even prepared a big dowry. But she won't lend us a dime now. I was really upset. Yeah, I'm not even that close to you guys. But since Linda's been living the high life thanks to the Taylor family, she should take responsibility. How could she do this to you? James said angrily to Mrs. Taylor. I told you so many times she's trouble, but you just wouldn't listen. Mrs. Taylor replied, Enough, it's too late for that now. She clung to me like I was her last hope. Jessica, please help us. If you help the Taylor family get through this, we'll make it up to you. Family ties can be built. I awkwardly pulled my hand away. I want to help, but I don't have that much money. The Roberts family isn't wealthy, and my company's not been around long enough to save up such an amount. So what now? James muttered. Don't drag my sister into this. Serves you right for trusting Linda. Linda came to me once, and I played back a recording from that time. I never expected she'd drive the Taylor family to ruin. Our conversation was played out, and I edited my parts out. Linda admitted she pushed the Taylor family over the edge for William. Mrs. Taylor broke down, and James looked furious. I'm going to kill that witch. Enough. I interrupted. You can't even see her now. Don't overestimate yourselves. I sighed. I'll figure something out. The Taylor family's villa and old house were already mortgaged. I told them they could stay here for now. James looked at me with gratitude, like I was still his dear sister. Mrs. Taylor seemed to find comfort, staying at my place, waiting for me to resolve everything. Then I got a call from an unknown number. Heard you've been looking for me. His voice was no longer warm, more sinister now. Damn, he's been hiding deep. After a long pause, I murmured, Ethan. Sis, you always seem to land on your feet. Every time. What do you mean? I croaked. He chuckled. You got reborn too, huh? I took a deep breath. Where are you? Even now, he wouldn't show himself. In M country. What, planning to kidnap me last life? Now going after my folks. If I actually took you, who'd rally up the cash for me? And what if you do get the money Taylor family's already done for? Kidnapping's illegal. No way you'll bounce back. He laughed coldly. Who said I was planning to? I got it. You're just like your old man. No wonder he picked you as the successor. I'm speechless. Ethan, why ruin me in the last life? I was living miserably already. Whose toe did I step on? I was just close to breaking free from the Taylors and creating my own path. Then I get done in. Jessica, I hate that indifferent attitude of yours, he snarled. It sounds familiar. Every Taylor said that to me. Be a docile princess like Linda, or a slacker like James. And I'll protect you like I protect them. The Taylor money's enough for you to splurge on. But you had to compete with me. Taking the spot I had, the deals I couldn't seal, you breezed through. I envied you, even Dad started looking your way. And now, don't blame me for being ruthless. I couldn't help but laugh, tears filling my eyes, thinking about my past life. Linda was jealous I was the true heiress, when the Taylors loved her more. James envied my grades, though he could still be the pampered young master doing nothing. Ethan was jealous Dad favored me, when I was just a pawn. I lived worse than any of them, but all they did was envy me. Crushing me was their only satisfaction. Ethan said, I want $1 billion, transferred to this overseas account in 5 days. Or you'll never see your parents again. I mean, you don't want to lose your family twice, right? His greed even surpassed his dad's. Where am I supposed to get that kind of money? Think I own a bank. If money's short, sell properties, stocks. And if that's not enough, your company shares will do. His tone was taunting. I scoffed. Ethan, when did I say my parents went to M country? You fooled me, but I didn't say I found them there. Want them alive? Pay up. He hung up. I quickly checked on my parents and Jake. They were safe, thank God. Back at the Roberts place, Mrs. Taylor and James were gone. The house was in chaos. Even the guards were hurt, and the cops were already there. The kidnappers were Ethan's men, but he himself was abroad. They caught the guys, but didn't even think of video calling. I sent the police the recording of my call with Ethan, and told them about his extortion attempt. Even the cops had a hard time figuring out what was going on with the Taylor family. The crazy thing was, both the kidnapper and the kidnapped had the same last name, Taylor. I explained, it's a big family, you know how it is. A few days ago, I did take my parents to the airport, but they didn't fly anywhere. They certainly didn't leave the country. Ethan went overseas and found nothing, while I went to pick up Mrs. Taylor and James at that time. What a mix-up, right? As for my parents, they're back home farming. After my grandparents passed, their 3 acres went unused. On the 5th day, I got a call from an unfamiliar number. I picked up and heard Mrs. Taylor and James pleading for help. Mrs. Taylor's voice was hoarse from crying. "Jessica, I know I was wrong. I'm sorry," she said. My hand tightened around the phone. Did she finally remember? "Sis, we weren't trying not to save you. It's all Linda's fault. She's the one." An unknown voice suddenly cut in. "Miss, do you have the money ready?" I was still processing Mrs. Taylor's words and hadn't responded. Better if they remember, gives me peace to get back at them. Why should I be the only one to remember the hurt? "Hello? Are you dead? Speak up." My throat was dry, and I whispered, "I want to say something to them." There was a pause. "Jessica, I'm your mom. Please save me, ma'am," I interrupted. "My parents are missing too. I can't ignore that. Jessica, Linda was kidnapped too. We need to save her. Don't blame us," they cried. The sobbing stopped and I hung up. Even though Linda hurt me, she never made me feel truly wronged because she was just an outsider. But they were my family. I sent the call recording to the police and cooperated with their investigation. I didn't care what happened to them, but it's always good to help the cops solve the case. Funny enough, there was already a spoiled fake heiress in the family. Ethan got grabbed back home and got locked up with his dad. Even though she wouldn't have pursued it, Mrs. Taylor was reluctant because it was her son. But James was determined. After James kept spilling secrets, Linda left the entertainment industry. The Taylor siblings ended up turning against each other. How could favoritism not lead to resentment? I never acted against Linda this time around. 1. I was busy dealing with the rest of the Taylors. 2. She was just too dim-witted. Despite my hatred for the Taylors, I had to admit, they were her strongest support. Now that the Taylors have fallen, I wonder if the Smith family still wants a daughter-in-law with such a bad rep. And William, what kind of good son-in-law would work so hard to destroy his in-law's family? 2 months later, I heard Linda had died. It was James who did it. He was a madman in his past life. 2 lifetimes of anger was enough to end hers. William put him in jail, determined to seek justice for his late wife. He sure made a name for himself. Mrs. Taylor came looking for me a few times, but found we'd moved away. How she lives now has nothing to do with me. "Sis, come and blow out the candles," Jake called. He just got his acceptance letter and was having a party. My mom couldn't stop smiling as relatives and friends congratulated her. "I've had many great students, but my proudest are these 2 kids," Dad said, a little tipsy, hugging both Jake and me. "Come on, grab another bottle." Jake complained, "I'm stuck with C University. Their food is terrible." "Sis, why don't you donate a cafeteria to the school?" I shot him a look. "Get lost." The end.